saw something on Twitter the other day that, let's see, has left me a little bit perplexed. Angry, even. I don't like being angry. Not that I don't get angry, I don't like it. Because as much as I can sort of find something funny and find it funny at my core, you know, like I'm even me guts are laughing and my hips are laughing and my feet are laughing. You know, it's something deeply tickles you, it's deeply funny. This is one of them where I'm just deeply annoyed. I'm like furious. And I can't shake it. It's been a few days now of being furious. And being furious it's boring and it's tiresome and so I'm going to just make a video about it. Now, I've been blocked on that Twitter X by the false priest, that Calvin Robinson, who's like an Islamophobe. He claims to be a priest, but you know, if he were a priest, he'd understand that we're all basically under the same God. And some people understand God better than others. Same God. It's like the God of shit happens. So it's like if you reach a sort of a level of understanding of God and decide that you might want to become a priest, you would have sympathy for everybody. A little bit. Not to sort of be a simp, but you'd understand that they're measured by reality. They can delude themselves as long as they like, and then reality will come and smash them in the face, and it's like, oh, God we were talking about. That's who he tends to do his punishing. So it's like the false priest gets himself a collar, and then suddenly he's like a right-wing partisan and like Islamophobic. Like it's us against them. Like I've joined this team against that team. And it's like, oh, you're deluded, aren't you? Because you've set yourself up against what could be said to be a minority, a very small number of people, a kind of fanatical elite, and you've set them up as your imagined enemy. So you're not a priest. You're a narcissist who's done the same thing as what a guy does when he slaps a wig on and cracks on he's a woman, so he gives himself a license to bully. He kind of puts himself on a pedestal and says, look, you've got to listen to me. Look, I've got a collar. I can't abide clergy like that. I've known, actually I'm of the church, aren't I? I mean, I was an altar boy. I've known priests like that in recent times, but I remember when they were a kind of wiser and more merciful group of people who listen. But that guy, he blocked me on Twitter because I accused him of being obtuse, and the likelihood that he had to go and look that up might have hurt his feelings, meaning a bit slow-witted, slow. And it was over him basically attacking Peter Hitchens without having really listened to Peter Hitchens' argument. Peter Hitchens had the right of things, as did I. I've been talking about the dangers of a Labour government on my channel and in my sort of social media output for about a decade. Like, this is what you'll get if you get those back in. It's like anyone with any sense in that party's gone. The Tories are bad, but the Tories have got like half a dozen people in their party who will say no. Think about it. So they've got some restraint. They've actually got someone there who can say, a dozen of them, who will say, no, don't do that because this is what will happen if you do that. The Labour haven't got any such thing going about it. And then the Labour, say, executive or leadership doesn't really understand its own party. Why? Well, because at the local level, people become Labour councillors to be above the law. Every Labour council in this country is corrupt. Every single one. And the public sector, well, they're a fifth column. So many people in this country work for the public sector that if all of them vote, Labour will get in if people don't turn out. That's how many of them there are working for the council, the central government, or various government agencies, people who work for companies that rent seek for the government. They've been sat there for years as where it's like, oh, we'll get looked after. It's like you're not even these days allowed to work for a part of the government unless you say, rah, rah, Labour. If you don't support Labour and you work for the government, you have to keep it secret. That's where we're at. We've been there for years. So it's like what needed to happen is, right, okay, we've had a snap general election called on us, which in some regards was suicidal. We know this. It was suicidal. And it meant that people who were planning, carefully planning, to make an attempt to like enter the House of Parliament, they had to rush everything. So it's like the Tories set it up to get defeated. Andrew Brigden, and I agree with him. He said Sunak called an election early because he didn't want to be a wartime Prime Minister. Because the orders have come in from across the pond, from our friends in the CIA, that there's going to be a war. We're having a war in Europe. They've decided we're having a war in Europe. They've been trying to provoke one for 20 years, and now's the time. And everyone's in lockstep, and Rishi Sunak didn't want to be a wartime Prime Minister. Starmer did. So they call this snap general election, and then it's a matter of, okay, anything that people might have had in mind by way of organising has been scuppered. Completely scuppered. So now everyone's rushing to get organised. And no one's got their eye on the ball. He is a swine when he starts, isn't he? Come here, you. Here. When he sits on the couch here, right, means he can see out the window. When he can see out the window, oh, he finds things to bark at. Everybody has taken their eye off the ball, and it'd be a matter of Peter Hitchens has his eye on the ball. Like I have my eye on the ball, so you've got to do whatever you can to keep the Labour Party out. I joined the Workers' Party of Great Britain, a socialist party. I joined a socialist party. Why? The only party that had a chance of beating Labour in Rochdale. And in the end were cheated out of it. We had a campaign up against us where the Labour councillor running the... because the guy who is our MP is not of Rochdale, he's not from Rochdale, nobody knows him. By all accounts, he's got family here, but nobody knows them. So we don't know who this guy is. He's got no track record in politics, claims to have been a journalist. If you go on the internet looking for him, he's written for something called the I paper recently, but he's not done any journalism since about 2010. So it's 15 years he's been in the wilderness, and he's suddenly now a Labour MP. The local councillor who ran his campaign for him endlessly lied day after day after day after day to finally having his reps on the doorsteps of the people of Rochdale going round saying that the Tate brothers are funding George Galloway's campaign. That's what they were saying on the doorstep. I don't know if they said they had proof that the Tates had given Galloway money and that he'd taken money from them as if he was a friend. I questioned George Galloway about this. So I ain't got a clue what they're on about. So he's got like a fundraising page online where you can make a donation, anonymous or not. And one of those two guys has sent him some money. And then it immediately becomes a news story. And it's completely beyond his control, but it didn't stop the Labour canvassers going from door to door saying his campaign is being paid for by these serial rapists, paedophile, human traffickers, misogynists. that's what we were up against in Rochdale. And then at the count, and it's been reported to the police, I've spoken to people who were there, and they've got video evidence, they've got all the evidence in the world to say that there was something really amiss with the count, as to certain votes for Mr Galloway were counted to Labour, and a couple of additional boxes turned up rather late at night, which just happened to be 100% Labour votes in these two boxes, and they won the election. And people say George Galloway didn't even have the guts to turn up to the count. Like, why? Because he'd already been reported, he'd already had reports from his people who were at the count that this has been stolen like a banana republic. All the evidence sent to Greater Manchester Police. Greater Manchester Police have refused to investigate it, because who do they answer to? The Labour Party's very own Andy Burnham, the Mayor and Police and Crime Commissioner of Greater Manchester. So it's done. But we had a chance keeping Labour out of Rochdale. So I'm like, yeah, we must try. We must try to do something. And as I say, Hitchens, he was right about it. He's like, wherever you are, whatever constituency you're in, don't vote for who you want to be the government. Vote against Labour, because Labour will finish off destroying this country. They are dangerous. So when Reform only got 4 seats and Labour got this massive majority, the false priest attacked Peter Hitchens, saying, you messed it up for all of us. You told people to vote Conservative. It's your fault that Reform didn't win, or that Reform didn't get a load of seats. And it's like, so you're obtuse. Every constituency has a different story. If you wanted to keep Labour out in some places, the right idea would have been to vote Lib Dem. If you wanted to keep people out in other places, the right idea was to vote Conservative. It's like, keep Labour out no matter what. You want a hung parliament. Why? Because a hung parliament has no mandate. So a hung parliament is accountable. Really accountable. Can be trusted not to make matters worse with sweeping changes in legislation. So what you want is a hung parliament. You can force a hung parliament. If you look at the percentages by which Labour won, a hung parliament was the right result. It's close to it. We were so close to it, but they ended up with a majority of 200-300. How many elections did they win by under 1,000? There's a lot. Or under a couple of thousand votes. There's a hell of a lot. A hell of a lot. And at the same time, you've had other idiots, like the academic agent, who is a hearty cunt. A hearty cunt, with his campaign for 0 seats for the Conservatives. He and his mates actively, putting the likes of Sargon, your Lawrence Foxes of this world, they campaigned for the Labour Party in the last election, because they wanted to punish the Conservatives and deliver us a totalitarian, authoritarian, insane, woke Labour Party. They're like, I heard him say it, the fool that is Sargon of a cat, Carl Benjamin, he's like, well, the Labour Party the Conservatives are a leftist party. Labour can't be any worse than the Conservatives. I'm like, are you kidding? Are you for real? But that's what they were pushing. 0 seats. Let's punish the Conservatives. Let's get them out of power. And they went out of their way and did a brilliant job of just changing, putting a finger on the scale slightly and delivering us a Labour government that got 19.8 8% of the country's vote, the population voted for them, and ended up with a majority of about 250 to 300 seats. You put your finger on the scale just a little. Nigel Farage could be said also to have delivered us a Labour government. It's like, this was serious business, this was for adults. It wasn't for people who are self-appointed experts to reach out to, because it's like Calvin Robinson actually probably thinks that he's like big. These people on the right, they think they're big. You look at the number of subscribers they've got on YouTube and they're not big. They reach an audience of, between them all, about 1 million people. They're not big. No one's heard of these people. But Hitch, Mail on Sunday, gets on television, and also David Stark, he's saying the same thing as Hitch. You must do everything possible to keep Labour out of power, regardless of how you feel about the Conservatives. Labour will do things now that Conservatives would never have had the guts to do. Never. Because, as I say, they've got half a dozen people in their organisation with some common sense who will see the repercussions of their actions. Labour have long since got rid of anyone with any sense. Long since got rid of. Door. You're not with us, you're against us. Door. Gone. There is not a single Labour MP who talks sense. They're all dreamers. They're all narcissists. They're a cult. And they ran on no policies. They ran on a slogan, didn't they? Change. Change. And today you've got that Rachel Reeves mouthing off, talking shit, saying we've got a mandate for change. In essence saying, we can do whatever we want and no one can do anything about it because we've got a mandate for change. Because we only ran on a slogan, change, we've got a mandate for change, meaning suck it up, dickhead, we can do whatever we want. That's what it means when you vote for change. We were in danger. In danger. And only Peter Hitchens, who's got a voice, David Starkey, they were the only ones who understood what was really going on. They were the only ones who understood what the stakes were. And these so-called influencers, right, the right, the moral right, call themselves whatever they want. The once upon a time the alt right, and then they became the common sense right. It's like these guys are no life experience. They're people who couldn't find work who became YouTubers. They haven't been through the ringer like your good narrator. Haven't really paid a price for saying no. Really haven't paid a price. Didn't understand, don't understand, as many don't, weren't alive, weren't aware when we had a Labour government, and aren't aware of the fact that there are those who fought for a decade to get rid of them. Nobody really wanted David Cameron's Conservative Party. Nobody. They voted for them to get Labour out. In the same way as Labour have got in now because people wanted to teach the Tories a lesson. You win by default, you get up on the stage and say, the people have spoken. We have a mandate for change. So back to the false priest this week, this is bullshit. He's just lying and seeking attention. Because that's what priests do. I'm leaving the country. I can't stand to bear this anymore. I'm leaving the country. You've pushed me out. I can't stand this country anymore. I'm leaving the country. It's like, okay, so you set a fire going. You committed an act of arson politically, and now you're leaving the country because you can, because you're a rich boy. You're a posh boy. You can afford to leave the country. You, sir, are an unemployed actor who became a political activist and then a priest. You are a right-wing agitator. You are a fucking doomer from the right. This week saying, it's a terrible thing. I'm leaving the country. And I picked that up in my X feed because I'm blocked by Calvin Robinson, so I don't get to see it. So somebody else posted a screenshot of him announcing he was going to leave the country. He's not leaving the country, is he? He's just saying he is in order to get some attention. But him going in two-footed on Peter Hitchens, blaming Peter Hitchens, saying you split the Reform vote. You told people to vote Conservative, and Peter Hitchens very clear: don't vote for who you want, vote against who you don't want. It was absolutely crucial that happened, and all it would have taken was for people to understand how much sense he was talking and then just rebroadcast that signal. We'd have got ourselves a hung parliament. A hung parliament, no matter how it worked itself out and became a coalition, would not have a mandate to make sweeping changes at all. They would have been accountable. But no, we get a skewed election, which it's like, I wouldn't put it past Labour's cult to have stolen 100 of those seats that they won, because the margins were so thin. Thin margins are just made for corruption, ballot box stuffing, ballot harvesting, dodgy postal votes. Just made for it. So Labour get in and they've got a mandate, but only 19.8% of the population's voted for him. That's actually a disaster. The low turnout is a disaster. It means your politics have failed. It means that half the country are excluded and they've got no one to vote for. So they don't live in a democracy because they don't. They understand they don't. Working classes have been abandoned and left behind. Unless you work for the government. Or you're willing to wear a wig and a pair of false tits. Or you like to sodomise other men. Then you're allowed in the club. If you basically get your dick out and put it on the table and saw it off with a hacksaw, you're allowed to join those who are politically represented, aren't you? All you've got to do is get your meat and two veg out and stick it on the table and chop it off with a fucking axe. That's all you've got to do to have representation, isn't it? All you've got to do. So now we're left behind with a country that's, if you read through the lines, and there's certain dog whistles that these people who call themselves influencers and intelligent and intellectuals on the right, that they don't pick up on because they're not underclass. The message clear as day to the underclass is that it's the best time ever in this country's history to be a criminal, because no one's coming after you. No one gives a shit. They'll pretend you don't exist. They'll protect you. But if you've got anything bad to say about the government, you've got an opinion that differs from the party line, you can expect a knock on the door off the police. That's the message that's been sent. Well, we've previously had government who've got like Project Fear. We've got a new government, it's Project Terror. Let's frighten these people so much that they don't stand up against us. And that's not going to work. It's not going to work. You're just actually provoking a more dangerous response from those who would protest against you. I've said previously, I know what this leads to. Labour government back in power, I know what it leads to. And it's like, I won't say what it leads to because some Labour idiot will hear me say it and say he's inciting violence. But I know what it leads to. We've seen it before. Amos, Cox, all I'm going to say, That's all I'm going to say. Amos, Cox. Look those names up. See what happened to them. Because that's what's going to happen. That's what we're going to see. Arson. Sorry. Yeah, arson, yeah. What? Yeah, this place is going to fucking burn at some stage or another. If your protests can be just easily infiltrated by all the local criminals who just see it as an opportunity to do whatever they want, because that's the thing, is a protest is a bit of a big tent, so every dickhead for miles turns up and joins in because, hey, it's fun, this. Isn't it fun? They turn up because it's fun. Protesting is fun. So idiots turn up to have some fun. Your protests can be just easily infiltrated by either put up to it or amateur enthusiast agent provocateurs. Suddenly you've got trouble, suddenly you've got police in the streets, and then you've got a government who, they don't go and find out what the underlying causes of what actually happened are. They've already decided. Rachel Reeves today, another one. She said that banning smoking in pubs, outside pubs and clubs and all these places, won't have any effect on hospitality. They already know. They've not asked anybody their opinion. They already know. They already know, you see. They've already decided. What's that a case of? Oh, something from the American left called other ways of knowing, which is, we're so enlightened, we're psychic. That being the most dangerous thing that ever comes out of the mouth of the American leftists. Other ways of knowing. Black women's intuition. Melanin makes us psychic. That sort of shit. Oh, you pull in the other ways of knowing card. You just know. That's incredibly dangerous. Incredibly dangerous. That's like world-ending madness. And we've got a Labour government that are full of people like that now. Who believe, because it suits them to believe, that they have a mandate for change, which means they can do whatever they want. And then a large number of the organisation are only in their organisation because membership of the Labour Party means you're above the law. You've got friends who can call off the police because the police are a wing of the fucking Labour Party. Since when was that ever supposed to happen? Well, it has. Through the back door of political correctness and wokeness and anti-bigotry and anti-fascism and anti-racism, they've created a consensus in the police force. So we've got a politicised police force who are not any longer interested in dealing with crime unless it's a serious crime where a lack of action would mean a terrible scandal. Other than that, they're not doing anything. They're not interested. They're more interested in silencing criticism than they are at preventing and solving crime. And this is what we've got. And then another side of it, as shit as the Conservative government was, they were nowhere near as inept and corrupt as your local council. Long as we had a Tory government, they always had someone to blame for their failures. Now they haven't. Which just makes nowadays that's just led to people falling into despair. Previously, with the Tory government, if your council failed incredibly badly, the Tory government would move in and bring in special measures and take over your council. So there was a level of accountability for a poorly performing council. Now there isn't. Now Labour councils can do no wrong. Now their sins will be forgiven, their debts will be paid. And criticism of them will be punished, as opposed to them being punished for illegal activity and corruption. And false priest says he's leaving the country. So I see it in my feed from Matthew Marsden, pretty boy actor who used to be in Coronation Street, who believes himself now one of the righteous. He reposted it. This is a tragedy for Britain. He's one of the good guys. What a tragedy. Really? It's like he's a false priest. He's a false priest. Say where you went at Hitchens was ridiculous. It's like you've not been listening to what he's had to say. You've picked up on a soundbite or something, and you've said you've ruined it for us. You've told people to vote Conservative and they've listened to you, as if people do. Influence, things on the internet. It's very hard to prove It's very hard to prove what your feedback even is when you broadcast like this. I know I've done it for long enough. You don't know what the feedback is. You don't know who you're broadcasting to. You've no idea, you've no way of knowing. But it's like, if enough people had have picked up what him and Starkey were trying to say about what will happen if you vote in another Labour government. If people had picked up on the sense of that and say, look, the strategy is vote against who you don't want. Vote against them. If you don't like this wokeness, if you don't like this waste, if you don't like this mass illegal immigration, if you don't like the way, the way that the divide and conquer of, hey, let's set the Muslim population of Britain up against these thugs. Hide behind them. If you're against that, you need to not vote for the Labour Party. Where you smug twats like, oh, 0 seats, let's teach them a lesson. Labour can be no worse than the Conservatives because the Conservatives are a leftist government. It's like, you don't know anything. Things can always get worse. That's the thing what's what makes people so stupid in this country. And it's not, I'm not having a crack at the poorest or the uneducated. The uneducated know that things can only get worse. People who've been through tough times, they know that things can always get worse. But these guys who call themselves influencers, who call themselves a movement, let's say that raggedy bunch of the right on social media and the like, let's say they have influence over 1 million votes. 1 million votes in the right places would have delivered us a hung parliament. We had 7,000 people in Rochdale vote for Reform, and Reform's candidate, no one's ever even seen a picture of him. He was a paper candidate. They knew they couldn't win, but they guaranteed a Labour victory. A paper candidate. He didn't campaign. No leaflets were put through any doors, and they got 7,000 votes. If 750 people who voted Labour had voted for George Galloway, we wouldn't have got a Labour MP who just has got no affinity with the town, doesn't know anyone, he's been shipped in because he's one of Starmer's mates. Boundary changes meant that George had like 3,000 votes taken away from him because they changed the boundaries for this election. And that was a response to Haywood and Middleton having voted Conservative last time. So Haywood and Middleton, for the first time in their history, vote for a Conservative because they hate the Labour Party. Only a couple of years ago. And so there's a boundary change. Like half of what is central Rochdale was moved into Middleton, Manchester. So it's like the Rochdale constituency now is not really that much of Rochdale's in the Rochdale constituency now. It's been made part of Hayward and Milton. Why? Because some woke twat who was in charge of, you know, the boundaries, who had a bit of an interest in seeing a Labour government in power, changed the boundaries to put what would be a very working class area, a very poor part of Rochdale, the poorest part of Rochdale, into Middleton, to make sure that the Tories could never win there. To make sure, by putting the poorest part of Rochdale in another constituency. Well, they'll all vote Labour, won't they? They're not going to vote Conservative because they're all oiks. And then George Galloway comes along, and because if someone comes along who's got a chance of winning, they all voted for him. See, this is what we're up against. And if those out there who want to be talking politics and be so naive, you should just shut up. You should just quit. Just go back to being an actor. You know, throw away the priest fancy dress costume, Mr. Robinson, and go back to being an actor. Go to another country where they've not heard of you, and set yourself up. Go to America. Go to Canada. A lot of TV work over there. Work on your fake American accent and get yourself into some fucking Netflix drama or something like that. And stay the fuck out of things you don't understand. Every single constituency be a completely unique battlefield. Do you want a Labour government? Well, I don't see that there'd be any different from the Conservatives. It's like, you people make me sick. That you would know nothing of much of anything as to the realities of what this country faces. I'm working class. We make up something like 80% of the population, maybe a bit more. I know a thing or two. You posh boys don't know shit, and you've made it all about immigration when it's not. Part of it, it's like it's accelerating the decline. It's not the cause of the problem. There are many problems in this country, structural problems, and they're all structural problems left behind from the 90s. I go back to 2001 when I bought a house for £32,000 and sold it 2 years later for 75. This shouldn't happen. This can't be real. There's a problem here, and because everyone who's got a mortgage could be said to have gained, because they're stupid, could be said to have gained. It's a good thing. It's growth. It's like, no, it's not. It's a credit bubble, and every government since that huge credit bubble happened have done everything they can to bribe everyone who's got a mortgage with low interest rates. And what does that do? It makes homes unaffordable. You have to live with someone. You may never get to leave. You may be someone who works full time your whole life and always lives with your parents. Now, I say, ever been to Peterborough? I have. Used to get all around the country. It's like, I've never seen as many people living in sheds in fields. Like big Jippo camps. Prefabricated housing. I've never seen anything like it. People cannot afford to live in the poor towns that they were born. The buy-to-let thing. The buy-to-let industry, let's call them, right? That's like, I can get a deposit because I've got money, so I'm going to buy a house and rent it out, and somebody else is going to pay for it for me, and I'm going to make a profit. Aren't I clever? You know, many local councillors around here are also private landlords with massive property portfolios. Do you know how many there are? What's their interest in? Keeping mortgage repayments as low as humanly possible. But when interest rates go up, they increase the rents arbitrarily. Number of people living in private rented houses. The flat above me is a privately owned rented accommodation. And there's a water leak. There's an overflow that spews out water-wise about 2 pints of water a minute, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. I'm a council tenant, but because it's not a council property, they won't do anything about it. It's a private landlord. The private landlord has no interest in getting it fixed because it will cost him money. So it's like, we've got some real slum accommodation in the north of England that no one really gives a shit about. A kid died in Rochdale because of black mould. And then suddenly, oh, we're doing something about it. We fixed it. We fired the chief executive and instantly fixed it. And if you ring us now with tales of damp, we will send some men round to paint over it with special paint, which is more toxic than the mould. That will get on your lungs, that paint they put over it. And it doesn't do anything, because what happens is the mould then, because water, you're up against water. Water gets everywhere, and water always wins in the end. So it manifests around it. So you've got this white patch on your wall where they've put this anti-mould paint on the wall, and then it moves it, it spreads it, and it's still the same. It's exactly the same. It's like, it's just obvious that that's going to happen, isn't it? Because of the nature of water and damp and mould. But they deny science, physics, common sense of what water's capable of and say, oh, well, we fixed it. And that's what we're up against. The private landlords, see, the council, they say, well, we're going to do something about the mould. But the private landlords are not doing anything about the mould. Private accommodation is worse than council accommodation. Why? Well, there's no interest in doing anything about it. Why? Well, all the private landlords are in bed with the council. They're all members of the Labour Party. Where I used to live, my councillor, who was this pathetic little, like, cross-eyed little fellow, who didn't even have the good nature or the character to look a person in the eye. You used to see him walking up and down the streets like some tramp. He was our local councillor, not a very good command of the English language, but his wife's sharp as hell. She's a horrid, feminist Pakistani bully. Horrible woman. Absolutely despicable. And she's a councillor too. And, they've got lots of money, those people. You go on the old internet, because you have to declare what the business is. He had 44 buy-to-let properties in the ward where he stood as councillor, and in a previous council election voted twice. Because he doesn't live in the ward where he stands, but he voted there, and then he also voted from a proxy address in his constituency. In the constituency he stands in, because he's got 44 properties there. And when the police questioned him about it, because he got caught, he claimed he didn't understand the rules of a democracy. And he's like my councillor. He was my councillor. We didn't knock on my door. His bloody missus did, though. Never knocked on my door ever. Why? Well, I've passed him in the street 100 times over the years, and he's never once looked me in the eye, nor good morning. See, we're like that, us northern people. We're not like Londoners, we're not like Southerners, and we don't look down on people because we understand mostly that we're all in this shit together. Believe it or not, we're all getting an equal measure of shit in our breakfast every day. And we tend to, if you're all right, the custom here is to, when you cross someone in the street, is to look them in the eye and say good morning or good afternoon or you all right, mate? Are you? But complete strangers. We're always weighing each other up. That's what we do. I greet everyone I pass in the street. When I go out, I don't get out very much these days because I'm not in the best of health. But when I did, I would everyone that I laid eyes on, who I had eye contact with, I'd give them a nod. I'd say morning, top of the morning. It's a tradition around here. You take it to London and people think you're crazy because no one looks at anyone in the eye in London. You're like, this is a strange place. Doesn't this feel terrible, this place? It's like there's money everywhere and it seems like in most of it people are doing quite well for themselves. It's like a different country. And in this country, people have got no manners and are socially awkward. Can't handle themselves properly. Like they live in fear of the stranger. Whereas my part of the world, the stranger is just someone you don't know yet. It's like I'm sick of these. Again, they say, oh, the Labour Party is controlled by a metropolitan elite, and it's like, and so's their ostensible opposition. And they're, in their way, racist. What? Yeah, they don't live in places that have got high immigrant populations like I do. They don't even weigh up things as simple as, okay, your town's got a huge immigrant population, but these people work and they own property. Now, if you want to mouth off about let's start deporting all these people, what does that do to your property rights? These people are here to stay. I would suggest you make friends with them. The allies that the right seek in order to keep a Labour government out of power, believe it or not, they are Pakistani Muslims. They'll work with you. But you'll never reach out to them because you can't stop demonising them. So the right as it stands, then I'll name the names, your Sargons, your academic agents, your Calvin Robertsons, your Lawrence Foxes, you're doing a job for the Labour Party by keeping the working classes divided because they're not your people. You don't really give a fuck about them. You will want their money and their attention, but you don't really care about their well-being. You don't give a fuck. You are as bad as the people you oppose. You don't give a fuck. If you did, you'd stop demonising half of the population, doing a job for the Labour Party. You don't realise this is what you're doing, but these are the repercussions of your actions because you don't know enough to be running your mouth in the first place. You should shut the fuck up about politics. You've not been following it long enough to have any grounding in it. My boy George Galloway goes back 55 years. So he's grounded in history. It's like you need that. You need that foundation. You need to be grounded in it. You need to, in some way, you say I say the working class population in this country is like over 80% of it. The poor. People who work from paycheck to paycheck. There's so many. Payday to payday. Counting the days until the money comes in. So many people live their lives like that in this country and they can't handle these endless financial shocks that they're getting. It's taking a massive toll on their health and their mental health. They don't know what's waiting for them. And we live in a time of upheaval where, first of all, IT has put millions of people out of work and robbed them of their careers, and now AI is going to do the same thing, but it's not going to have the same effect on the professionals and those who work for the council, teachers and the like. They're not going to be affected by this. Doctors, they're not going to be affected by this. Nurses aren't going to be affected by this, but everybody else is going to be. And it's like, no one cares. Reinvent yourselves, for fuck's sake. Smarten up. You stand for freedom of speech and stand for property rights. And then suddenly everyone's got something in common.